The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
$14.90 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. And have you been wondering about the ever-accelerating pace of technology, what new is coming around the corner, and how you can profit by it? My next guest, Alex Daley with CaseyResearch.com, has a few of those answers. Alex, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, Carrie.
Hey, it's great to have you on. And technology, is it a friend or foe, or both?
Well, friend indeed, I'd say. Like any good friend, it's certainly going to have its downsides. But technology has advanced the state of living in this country and around the world in, I think, ways that anyone can appreciate. Everything from access to information and education to access to medicines and vaccines and clean water. And technology is no doubt a force for good. And I think it will continue to be. Though, as technology becomes more powerful, the bad that you can do with it matches the good that you can do with it.
Yeah, I guess it's like anything, really. But there's a lot of really interesting things coming down the pike, and people are scared off by it because, especially investors, because most of them fail. Like, you look at the biotech companies, only a few of them ever survived, although we're in the next wave. And what's the key to successful investing in early technology?
Now, the first is to not fall in love with the technology itself. Technology is a very seductive mistress, right? It's very easy to look at a great new piece of technology and say, wow, this is going to change the world, and to ignore the basic economics of the world itself. People look at the innovation in recent years, they think back to when they were kids and, the television in the house had a 12-inch screen and was maybe they got their first color one when they were a kid, and they think to, these 1-inch thick or even, half-inch thick LED televisions hanging on the wall and, computerized display signs at McDonald's and all of this. And they think, wow, isn't this incredible what we've invented in the last 20 years? Not remembering that, the plasma television was invented in the, late 1800s. These things take time to develop. There's a natural cycle of conceiving of a technology, making it practical for a prototype, but then making it practical for mass manufacturing, mass distribution, and of course consumer adoption. People don't love change. I say this all the time. I regularly get negative feedback on it, but at the end of the day, we as human animals don't particularly like change, not drastic change at least. And so it takes time for these things to adopt. Biotechnology is one of those spheres where it's taken the better part of about 20 years now for us to really advance the science to a point where we can understand what's going on in the human body, manipulate it safely, and start to tackle some of these biologically oriented diseases, things like the many forms of cancer out there, which frankly we've not known what to do with cancer except slash, burn, and poison for a very long time. But now finally we're starting to address it at a biological level. So I think we're at the dawn of the bio age. I don't think, as many investors have said, that we're sort of coming to the end of this, of what was started with Amgen and Genentech. I think, in fact, we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's obvious. And sometimes these technologies are invented earlier, but they can't be produced without other technologies coming in there because they're just not going to work right, or, the theory's there, but the technology to produce it doesn't exist. So like the plasma TV, and how are you going to power it and all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting. And we were talking a little bit about energy generation because we're kind of stuck back in the late 1800s or early 1900s for power generation, the power grid, and not just in the US, but really all over the world. There's not like these smart grids. And where's that heading with cold fusion? What's your take on that?
Now, energy is certainly, it's the biggest industry in the world because it powers everything else, which also makes it the most complicated and most meddled with industry in the entire world. Energy is tough because when you put in an electrical line, electrical system, you're trying to put it in for 50 years or 100 years. You're not expecting like a computer for it to be picked up and replaced in 2 or 3 years with something new. So energy tends to change more slowly than every other industry. Solar power, wind power, these things were invented in the 1950s and earlier. And we're still just starting to be able to embrace some of them. But, even the things we have embraced haven't made a lot of sense. You look at some of the technologies like solar photovoltaic, solar PV, a real popular form of solar energy out there that you see on rooftops and these solar farms everywhere. Frankly, it doesn't make any sense. Economically, it doesn't make any sense to do solar electricity. It costs, somewhere between 8 and 20 times as much to generate it as to just burn a piece of coal. So it will never hit the mass adoption. You'd have to cover, 3/4 of the land mass of the United States in solar panels just to power the world. It's going to take an incredible effort to get there. What you have to look for if you're looking at energy is how can we make energy efficiency more useful? How can we make it available to individuals? How can we make the appliances in our homes more energy efficient? How can we make power plants themselves and buildings more energy efficient? Those are the things that are going to have near-term, immediate impact for investors. So things like smart meters, the ability for a power company to deploy a smart meter and not have to send literally armies of human beings driving around the world to go look at a little analog meter on the side of your house. It makes no sense. It's a colossal waste of labor and productivity. And so smart meters are an inevitability. There's a little bit of a, blip in getting them out the door because people are worried about things like, radiation and this and that, even though they use the same frequencies as cell phones. It's sort of ironic how dangerous a little bit of knowledge is. But yeah, smart meters are one of these near-term things you can look at and say, here's a interesting consolidating industry. A lot of people made a lot of money on the acquisition of INL by Toshiba. The biggest smart meter manufacturer is now a member of Toshiba, so it can be a sort of full end-to-end solution. What I look for in energy are things that are near-term, are going to positively affect the economics, and are going to reduce energy usage or produce energy for as cheap or cheaper than conventional fossil fuels. If it doesn't meet one or more of those criteria, it won't be successful. So you have to be careful investing in a lot of these green technologies because many of them are idealist. They're great technologies, but they're just not economically competitive. And that goes back to all investing. All investing is about not falling in love with the technology and falling in love with the economics of the technology instead.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because the Chevy Volt, okay? I followed that thing from the moment Bob Lutz introduced it at the auto show in New York a number of years ago. No relation, by the way, although we do talk once in a while. And the fact is that the way that thing works, if you're not driving more than 40 miles a day, you use next to no gasoline. And yet the thing is a dismal flop, and it definitely has an appeal in a lot of ways. So is it that the market wasn't ready? Is it the cost that off even with the subsidy? Or did they just blow it?
The problem to begin with is the subsidy. The problem with the electric car industry, the problem with the solar industry, the problem with a lot of these things is that governments get involved and they manipulate the economics. And suddenly, a company like General Motors looks at this and says, oh, well, with the subsidy, we can afford to make the car cost this much and that much. With the no interest loan to build our facility, Tesla makes different decisions. Fisker makes different decisions. All of this government bootstrapping it doesn't force companies to become economically competitive. It lets them, cut corners here and there. And the electric vehicle is suffered a bit from all this meddling, all this, messing around in the market. But if you take a step back from individual vehicles and individual company success and look at how are electric vehicles doing as a market, right now they're about $1 billion a year market. Most analysts who are looking at the electric vehicle market believe that by about 2016, in just 4 short years, it'll be a $20 billion a year market. That's a huge compound annual growth rate. If I'm an investor, I'm not looking at it as, can the electric car replace the gasoline car? I mean, good luck replacing 800 million vehicles on the road around the world. Yep. That's going to take 80 years. It took us 100 years to get there. It's going to take us 80 years to replace them. But are electric vehicles more and more important? Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're interesting in the fact that people with closed loop fleets, companies like UPS and FedEx, where they know exactly, because they have computer-driven logistics, where any given truck is going to drive in any given day, they can benefit hugely from moving to electrical-based vehicles. But until you have big customers like that, for whom it makes economic sense, who buy large fleets, who drive down the prices of batteries, who drive up demand for better battery technology and more battery manufacturing, these things are going to continue to be overpriced. They're going to continue to be out of the reach of the consumer. And what really excites me about electric vehicles, frankly, is electric trucks.
Yeah.
There's, the Volt is great, the Prius is interesting. All these things are sort of, gimmicky, magical little technologies, but they don't have a real true economic impact. Do it in trucks, and you have something that will likely get adopted and will likely have a huge economic impact. I like natural gas as a truck fuel as well. Not just
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, diesel engines can be converted to natural gas for a few $1,000s for less than 10% of the price of the truck itself. And with natural gas now selling at $2.77 per million BTUs, I mean, it's the cheapest it's been, inflation adjusted, effectively forever.
Yeah.
And it's doesn't show any real sign of going back up in price. We have untold amounts of shale natural gas available to us in the United States. It's a domestic fuel. We are getting some government support behind it, namely in the way of removing subsidies from competitive industries like oil and
ethanol.
And ethanol, exactly. I mean, the expiration of a 30-year ethanol subsidies is massive. It's a huge amount. Collectively, we've pumped $45 billion into ethanol subsidies over the last 30 years, effectively, paying farmers to grow corn we don't need and put things into our engines that just rot them from the inside, cause corrosion.
Hey, and natural gas, we're kind of getting off of what we talked about initially, what we were going to talk about, but you raised such a great point that I gotta tell a story. I went to Vegas, it was about 6 months ago. We get picked up at the airport by a limo, and I notice as he's throwing the bags into the trunk, it says this vehicle runs on CNG, compressed natural gas, propane. And I'm saying, like, hey, what's that like? And he said, well, in the summer, it can't fill up as much as it can in the winter because of the temperature and the compression. The colder it is, the more you can compress the gas. He says it's a little bit slower, but it's really cheap because the price differential is about 6-fold per BTU when you go petroleum as opposed to natural gas. And the fact of the matter is that every car can run on natural gas, and there seems like there's no impetus to develop that infrastructure, because that's really all we need. A converter, which is like $500, and an infrastructure of fueling stations, and we would be there, and yet nobody is lifting a finger. And like you said, we have untold quantities of shale gas still in the ground.
But Kerry, what makes you think that nobody's lifting a finger? We've had development of nearly 150% growth for the last 3 years of natural gas filling stations in the United States available for public use. I mean, it is growing. It's just when you start from zero, and you're dealing against an industry that is as large and pervasive as the automobile and gasoline industries are, it takes a long time to be perceived as making a dent from the sort of general public consciousness. But really, one of my favorite investments right now is CNG filling stations. I like that the government is meddling with the market here. I don't like to see government meddling, but if I see it, and if I see somebody getting involved and starting to shift the economics, as an investor, I'm sure going to take advantage of the distortion that they're about to cause or are starting to cause. That's one of my favorite techniques for investing. It's one of the things we do best at Casey Research. One of the reasons we have outperformed every major index in our industries is that we just take advantage of these inevitable trends or these obvious manipulations of the market to try to make money. And natural gas is one of those places where there's a great deal of opportunity because the economics of it make sense even without the meddling. And yet we're starting to see meddling because the economics make so much sense, because the perception is, wrongly so, that no progress has been made. We're starting to see the government starting to push rules that will require certain amounts of fleets to convert to natural gas. Why it's necessary when we're at the fastest growth rate we've ever had for natural gas vehicles and filling stations, beyond me. But if I could explain to you the thought process behind any legislator, I would probably be a very, very, very wealthy man, because I'd have invented like an infinite improbability engine, such as like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
And you'd probably be running Casey Research too. And like progress is hard to measure because it's anecdotal in our day-to-day life, and yet, like you said, it's really going up there with natural gas. And maybe if the government wants to meddle, the best way for them to meddle is just, hey, you get to keep more of it. I think if there was an incentive out there for natural gas filling stations where first 5 years your profits are tax-free or something like that. I mean, I don't like the government being involved, but I like incentives where they threaten to get out, where the incentive is, we'll stay away from you, we will leave you alone, like the internet, local government, state government moratorium. When their incentive is, we'll leave you alone, just hurry up and do it. That's the best kind of incentive,
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, picking between Sodom and Gomorrah a little bit, but if I have to pick, right?
Right.
I don't want to turn this into a political debate, so we should probably turn back to other technologies. I think that's what people want to hear about. But that said, the problem with any subsidy, be it a positive subsidy, an infusion of cash, or just a reduction of taxes, is it disadvantages all the competitors. And for all you and I know, or all any legislator could ever possibly know, maybe by disadvantaging disadvantaging every competitor of natural gas by advantaging natural gas, you're taking investment dollars away from the thing that will replace all of these fossil fuels. And that's the problem with manipulation, is you create artificial voids in the market. And these artificial voids have a tendency to last many, many, many years, as we've seen with ethanol. And they create an untold amount of disincentive to innovate outside of the incentivized area. And anything that disincentivizes innovation is bad in my book.
Yeah, and then you get malinvestment, and then you have this mess of an economy that we have because they're so busy trying to pick winners and losers. But like you said, no politics here. And so we get on, we're talking about 3D faxes, and people don't quite get what they are. Briefly describe it and tell us where it's going.
Well, the process of what is more technically known as additive manufacturing is probably the most revolutionary technology other than biotechnology that we're going to see having come out of the latter part of the 20th century. It's a technology that was used just for rapid prototyping, just the ability to deposit down a thin layer of material like you were printing with an inkjet printer. In fact, this stuff is built on top of inkjet technology because it is so precise and it is so cheap. You can just layer down layer after layer of a material and build something. And this, it was used to build shapes of, maybe architectural models, quick prototypes of, ergonomically designed components, so like, steering wheels for cars and things. And so you could kind of get the right shape, the right feel, the right look. But what's happened is as the prices come down, as these machines, as people have realized that the power of these machines is they can make one thing just as cheap as they can make 10,000 things, is that they're changing the economics of manufacturing itself. And now that we have real materials, PVC-like plastics, strong metals that can be used in airplanes and automotive industries, able to be printed in 3D, we're suddenly finding that we're onto the era of mass customization, where 1 or 10 or 10 million of something can be made for about the same price per unit. And what that means, I mean, what it really ultimately affects economically is that the benefit, the big driver in manufacturing has always been the willingness of a party to invest the huge capital up front in developing a specific manufacturing plant that made one thing really cheap. And that person had a competitive advantage. They call it economies of scale. Everybody's heard that term. It really just means that, if I make enough of something, it becomes cheap enough that I have a competitive advantage. Well, suddenly with 3D printing, the manufacturing happens at the end. The manufacturing is just an afterthought. Everything, anything of whatever shape or material can be made out of the same couple of machines. And so the value is added not in capital investment, but the value is added in knowledge, much like computer design and development. The value is added in the design of the system or the design of the object. So suddenly, you come up with, whether it's, a lighter weight engine or super lightweight material that can be printed, or just a cool little widget that people want. Yeah, I don't care if it's a fancier toothbrush or napkin ring. It can be made on the same machine as any other object that can be made. And 3D printing can potentially revolutionize manufacturing, but it is still more expensive. It is still just growing, but it's gone from, a couple of $1 million a year industry 20 years ago to more than $1 billion a year industry today, and is growing rapidly to, what many expect to be a, 20 to $50 billion industry about a decade from now.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to decentralize manufacturing and, like you said, bring it closer to the design phase, which a lot of time gets wasted between design and production, back and forth. No, you can't do that. That widget costs too much, or we can't get that widget. And now it's like, if you design it, you could build it, and it's seamless. And that's
absolutely,
yeah.
And it takes away one of the big things, which is the labor advantage, right? And one of the reasons most manufacturing has moved outside the United States and Europe into places like China and India and Mexico and more so to Africa these days is that labor is cheap in those markets, and it requires a lot of human intervention to assemble these complex parts and stuff. With 3D printing, you can print a complexly assembled multi-part object already assembled. And you build it from the ground up how you want it to come out, and amazingly, you can do pretty incredible things, especially if you're working with simple things like metals and plastics, so like toys, and that kind of stuff is manufactured with. All of a sudden, the labor advantage disappears, and frankly, the closer you are to the delivery point, the better. All of a sudden, having a cheap labor in China and a giant shipping container doesn't really help you. All of a sudden, you're better off just having a 3D printer that's, 5 blocks away. You order your model, it's zapped electronically over the internet to that printer, it's printed out, and it costs a nickel to deliver instead of $25.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see that. And, the whole thing, like, what are they going to do with those container ships? And obviously, they'll start with smaller items probably first, and then rapidly be adopted, because I just see a huge rush. And obviously, Casey Research has an idea of the places you should be investing there, I assume, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Casey's Extraordinary Technology, the publication that I edit, we cover everything from biotechnology to information technology to additive manufacturing and 3D printing. We try to provide people an idea of what's the best way to invest, which companies have the competitive advantages, and what's best. We've had a great track record. Anybody who wants to look at it and subscribe is happy to can log in and see our full archive of every pick we've ever made, our full portfolio, all the performance. It's all there for you to see. The track record speaks for itself. I won't go into detail there. I mean, what we try to do is keep abreast of, what's changing and what new things have come out. Has a new regulation changed the economics of an industry? Has a new IPO brought out a player that we couldn't invest in before? Is there an area where, we'd love to invest, but there's not yet public companies, but maybe we can invest through BDCs and these kind of public investments in venture capital firms? We cover the gamut. We're opportunistic investors looking at, how is technology changing our lives? How is technology changing the economics of companies and the world? And that's how we focus.
Yeah, what I like is, there's a lot of Casey publications. subscribed to a number of them over the years, and really they're all cutting edge. And Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show, for explaining to people that even though the economy looks bad, there's a lot of really exciting things going on, and really it's just a matter of time till they start hitting the product cycle and really improving our lives.
Yeah, if you have the patience as an investor, there are some phenomenally great companies out there doing incredible things with technology, the kind of companies who can really, frankly, change your life by investing in them early enough. And that's what we look for. And I'm excited about the future. I've never been more so. So thanks for having me on, Gary.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, and we'll check back with you on a regular basis to follow these trends.
Great.